Going into their nominating convention in May of 1848, the Democrats had three high-profile names running for the top spot: Michigan Senator Lewis Cass, Secretary of State James Buchanan, and Associate Justice from New Hampshire Levi Woodbury. Martin Van Buren was expected to make another run for the presidency, but unlike his previous attempts, Van Buren's path to getting the nomination was slim at best, and he ultimately left to form a new coalition group known as the Free Soil Party. By the way, we have a video talking about the Free Soil Party if you want to learn more. Ultimately, it was Lewis Cass who won on the fourth ballot with William Orlando Butler, a former representative of Kentucky who served as Major General in the Mexican-American War, as his running mate. Despite the Whig Party being against the Mexican-American War, they soon changed their tune heading into their convention, as two of their potential nominees, Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott, both served as generals during the war. Henry Clay originally wasn't going to run in 1848 due to his habit of losing presidential elections, not to mention his son, Henry Clay Jr., was killed in action during the Battle of Buena Vista in February of 1847. Similar to the Democrats, the Whigs would decide their candidate on the fourth ballot, with Zachary Taylor coming out as the winner. Although his victories in the Mexican-American War made him a popular figure, some in the Whig Party were uneasy with Taylor as the head of the ticket going into the next election. Because Taylor's political views were vague at best, and the fact he'd never voted in an election prior to 1848 made it hard for some Whigs to support him. In fact, Daniel Webster, who also ran for the nomination in 1848, also had a dislike of Zachary Taylor, so much so that he flat-out refused to be his running mate during the convention. Speaking of the convention, the two major candidates running for the VP spot was New York Comptroller Millard Fillmore and former U.S. Representative of Massachusetts Abbott Lawrence. Realizing a revolt would ensue from the anti-slavery Whigs if Lawrence got on the ticket, cleared the path for Fillmore to become the running mate. By most accounts, the election of 1848 was kind of lackluster, with Taylor's campaign centering around his military status and little else. Lewis Cass, meanwhile, is attempting to keep the Democrats united whilst trying to downplay the issue of slavery, and Martin Van Buren is basically running to prevent Cass from winning northern states like New York, which would help him win the election. On November 7, 1848, General Zachary Taylor became the 12th U.S. president in another close election. Yet while the Whigs may have regained control of the White House, their collapse as a political party was almost certainly guaranteed. By the time the 1850s rolled around, the Whigs were beginning to circle the drain, and America wasn't too far off either. As Zachary Taylor's presidency began, Congress was split when it came to the Mexican Cession, as several states like California and New Mexico were still undecided on whether it would be pro- or anti-slavery. Seeing how Taylor's presence alone angered many within the Whig Party, it's not a surprise to hear his handling of this issue divided many. President Taylor supported the idea of California becoming a free state and made efforts to ensure that this happened, with the state officially joining the Union in 1850. This infuriated many pro-Southern Whigs, especially when you learned that Taylor was a slave owner from Louisiana and should in theory be in favor of expanding slavery. The thing is about theories is that sometimes they don't always go as planned upon execution. Taylor may have been a slaveholder, but he refused to expand it into the Western territories as he felt the practice wouldn't work there from an economic standpoint. But Taylor didn't just anger Southerners with his decisions. He also annoyed Northerners due to Taylor being against Whig policies of infrastructure spending. By the final months of Taylor's time in office, he effectively became persona non grata in the eyes of some within the party. On July 4, 1850, Taylor had become gravely ill after eating some raw cherries and drinking iced milk during an event in Washington. By July 9, 1850, President Zachary Taylor would die at the age of 65 following a bout of gastroenteritis. Taylor's passing not only made him the second Whig to die while in office, it also elevated Millard Fillmore to the presidency just in time for him to sign a compromise that would further signal the end of the Whig Party. The creatively named Compromise of 1850 was authored by both Whig leader Henry Clay and Democratic Senator from Illinois Stephen Douglas. The compromise was a series of bills designed to prevent a civil war from breaking out whilst easing tensions regarding slavery. And while the first part did indeed happen, as the Civil War wouldn't take place until 1861, the second part didn't happen. Among adding California to the U.S., dealing with territorial issues with Utah and New Mexico, banning the slave trade in D.C. and tackling border disputes around Texas, the Compromise of 1850 also saw the Fugitive Slave Act being included. Basically, the act required American citizens to hand over previously escaped slaves to the authorities, with the slaves then being handed over to the owners they had ran away from. Aside from this act forcing Northerners to aid in the return of runaway slaves, the act also didn't say anything about determining whether an accused person was actually a slave. Meaning if someone accused an African American of being an escaped slave to the authorities even though they weren't, then authorities had no grounds to question this and took that person into custody. Unsurprisingly, many northern states refused to go along with the Fugitive Slave Act, and many Southerners began to complain over the North's disinterest in following the law. The Compromise of 1850 would also serve as Henry Clay's last significant piece of legislation, as the great compromiser's health had been failing for many years due to tuberculosis, with his death occurring on June 29, 1852, aged 74. Only several months later, on October 24, 1852, Daniel Webster would die at the age of 70 following a final failed attempt at winning the Whig Party's nomination for president. With their deaths, the Whigs continued to spiral out of control, and when the time came for the party to meet its end, it would be just as dramatic.